The blade of Wing Fun was haunted!
I think I liked the man with the sword for a hand better.
So creepypastas were a pretty big thing back in the day. You know, the scary stories that weren't all that scary, but they were also all over the internet. And I think about it, most of them weren't very good at all either. Whatever, I was like 13 when the big ones, like Jeff the Killer and Slenderman, started to take off. And if this starter pack meme that describes me way more accurately than I'd like to admit is anything to go off of, you know all my buddies and I were really into them. But I also haven't really looked at the genre in like 5 years. So I want to look back at some of the stories that stood out to me and see if they still hold up. But I don't really want to talk about the big ones, you know, people always talk about, like Jeff the Killer or Slenderman. I want to talk about the ones I remember and I feel like no one else does. So by the end, tell me some of the creepypastas you remember, and if there are some interesting ones or you open up some kind of repressed memory, I'll take a look at those and reevaluate my feelings on them. Up first is normalpornfornormalpeople.com by Cosby Daff. I think that's how you say it. One of the first stories I remember reading, it's about a guy who receives a chain email linking him to the site, him browsing the videos, with videos getting more and more bizarre as it goes on. It starts, I don't want to say innocent enough, but not very weird, I guess is the term. With a video of a couple feeding a dog peanut butter sandwiches, to a man with no legs breakdancing, and crying. Then finally, the kicker of the story, useless.avi. A video of a woman trapped in a room, tied to a bed, with a shaved chimp painted red in there with her, and the chimp proceeds to beat her to death. And the story ends with a convenient, oh, the site got taken down, and all message boards I try to start a thread on talking about it ban me. Reading it now, it's just kind of It's not bad, but it's not good. It's really just a product of its time. But it also really benefits from the fact that it isn't full of hyper-realistic blood or internet people stalking the writer like you see now. He just gets banned from Reddit for trying to talk about the site. It's probably because he's mass spamming the subs. I remember the story being good for 3 reasons. The first was it was kind of buyable. The internet wasn't as organized back then. I mean, it wasn't exactly the crazy, outlands it was back in the early 2000s. But the best way I can describe the internet back around 2010, 2011 is the West in Red Dead Redemption 1. The internet was still mostly wild and kind of doing its own thing, but civilization and order were slowly creeping in, so the idea of coming across something like this was buyable, it was believable. 2, there were rumors that useless.avi got mass re-uploaded to YouTube because they didn't give a fuck back then, and I remember seeing some thumbnails for it myself, so it helped with the belief that this was a real site. I don't remember actually watching the videos, but if I remember correctly, they were all long enough to be rickrolls, so there's probably just that. And the third reason was my buddy Alex actually found a website called Normal Porn for Normal People, and it was just a holy shit, this is real. It had the name in orange letters across the header and a gray backdrop. I can't exactly remember what the hyperlinks led to. I think they were dead. I don't remember. Either way, all these things combined led to my dumbass thinking it was real. Obviously, it's not now. Up next is the Holder series, a collection of short stories telling you how to receive mysterious objects with some kind of powers that it doesn't really explain. But they also make it very clear that none of these objects can ever come into contact with each other. And the start of these were all pretty similar. For example, if you want to find the holder of the end, you go to any town in any country, enter a mental institution or halfway house, and ask to visit someone who calls himself the holder of the end. The stories then explain the trials you gotta go through in order to get the item, as well as cautions of going through the trial and when to run because it failed. Looking back at these, they're not very well written, but the idea is there. These are along the same vein as the SCP Foundation, where it's a bunch of different authors all kind of making their own thing, but up in the same vein. Really, the only difference is instead of it being science and field reports, they're super short how-to guides, and unfortunately it didn't really take off like SCP. I think the big reason was they limited themselves to the number of 538, whereas SCP, you can just kind of keep going and keep making things up. But I'll say another reason why I didn't take off is because these work better as stories around a campfire, not read online by yourself. But that's just a theory. A creepypasta theory. God, did I really just make that joke? But seriously, go read some of these if you never have. Like I said, the idea is good, and not all of them are bad. Our next story is Dating Game by Slime Beast. And I remember Slime Beast being my favorite creepypasta writer back in the day because he could actually write, unlike most of the other edgy teens posting stories back then. Some of his works are Lost Episodes and Abandoned by Disney. You might have heard of them. So I went to go back and look at the first story I read by him. The story is about a loser who works at Burger King. I'm not even kidding. The beginning is very self-deprecating. But he goes on one of those speed dating things. And he meets a girl, one thing leads to another, they get married and live happily ever after. Nah, I'm just kidding. The writer finds out she's batshit insane and killed her first husband and 2 kids via a computer in their basement. And while the build-up was good, the ending of this was really, really dumb. Since his wife was behind him waiting to attack but was thwarted by neighbors calling the cops after hearing the author scream, it really makes no sense because he saw his wife leave for the store. We're expected to believe he didn't see his wife's car in the driveway, or that she snuck into the locked basement with only one key. And if the neighbors heard his screams, why didn't they hear her family scream? And why did no one ask when they all disappeared? Even if they bought that the husband left, wouldn't someone have seen his car missing? Or watched him leave? And then they ended with the idea that she runs a cult of murdering women and one is going to take revenge. Yeah, once you start to really think about the end of this one, it doesn't make sense at all. It just kind of falls apart. Remember I said a lot of these weren't filled with hyper-realistic blood and ultra-violence and terrible writing? Well, you wanna know what were filled with those? Lost Episode creepypastas. And they all suck. Ed, Edd and Eddy Lost Episode, SuicideMouse.avi, Max and Ruby Lost Episode. All of them are bad. And super basic, with all of them being either I was an intern at such and such studio, or this episode aired at an ungodly hour so very few people saw it, but I didn't have a photographic memory from when I was 4. And the only scares come from hyper-realistic blood and fictional characters doing things that are out of character. Like, yeah, SpongeBob will sit there and laugh at Squidward, he does it. Which was always terrifying, and if I'm not mistaken, some of them even said they led to suicide for the viewers. And I just don't get why these were popular. They weren't good. I didn't like them back then. I don't like them now. They just sucked. But the last one I want to talk about is Kagome, who I couldn't find the name of the author for, so I'm sorry about that. But it's the story of bad German scientists from the 40s who go to an orphanage near Hiroshima in Japan, and they plan on using the kids there to find a way to achieve immortality through a pseudoscience idea they have about a kill switch in the brain, with the story ending and telling you not only what happens if you come across the orphanage to this day, in the perfect small town ghost story fashion, but that this is a true story, and this one was actually still really good. The background and the setup, it makes a lot of sense. The Germans did a lot of really fucked up medical experiments and looked for a lot of ancient relics to give magic powers. Fun fact, did you know Hitler had whole task force assigned to finding things like the Holy Grail and Fountain of Youth? I'm not even kidding, look it up. That's a fact. But this one, it was still well written, decently paced, disturbing payoff in the end. And I remember this one really, and I remember it really standing out to me because of the fact that it seemed real. Not really that you can go find them in the forest today aspect, more of just the idea that Nazis would do this to kids, and that's fucking terrifying to mess up some kids like that. Okay, maybe the idea of these kids actually still being there was terrifying too, but I don't want to admit that because I'll sound dumb. There were quite a few of these things. I'm starting to remember why I stopped reading these, mostly due to the bad writing and the fan art. My god, the fan art for creepypastas really just takes you out of the immersion of the fear. But I still like going back and rereading some stuff from my childhood. But guys, I think this is going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. Like I said, tell me some creepypastas you remembered from back in the day. And if you unrepress enough childhood memories, I'll probably do a part 2 on this. I'm probably going to do it either way because I really like going back and rereading these. Okay, bye-bye.